So my last lecture, I simply was kind of going over some of the issues over ideology that were taking place, and there'll be more detail and discussion of the actual, excuse me, the happenings of these religious wars that are taking place. Um, in the middle of all of that, we see the I wouldn't say evolution of the family, but the continual fluctuation of family values. And I think this is very interesting as well. I'm not going to say a lot on this section. It's just, you kind of we're always coming up to this cultural expectation or, ideal, and then the actuality on the ground. And so the way that the family structure was set up, as you read in this chapter, um, there's a long tradition that the man is the head of the house, according to a excuse me, uh, religious traditions and many other non-religious traditions. I'm not saying that that was right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not making a saying what I think about it, other than the fact that we see that that's a pattern, okay, of a kind of the man ruling the household. Now, as I was mentioning in the book, as many men died, you had plagues and you have wars and all these different kind of things. When you have a shortage of men, or men are out and about, the women are actually going to take on roles that officially they're not even supposed to be capable of doing, and in fact they are. And we see in the medieval time period, something that I had discussed in my WesternCiv104. There's a documentary talking about how, in fact, the damsel in distress of the Middle Ages was a concoction from the 19th century Victorians, and that women actually had a lot of power. But this kind of has a similarity, with the role of women in World War II in America, where a lot of the men were out and women were doing, working in factories, improving themselves out of necessity that they could actually do things that men could do, and then the men coming back and wanting those jobs and wanting women to go right back into the household and play that quote unquote traditional role. And so, you see that kind of thing take place. And so, I don't know. It seems to me, looking in history, that this kind of pattern, this fluctuation, has occurred off and on in many different stages. And, you know, it's simply good to reflect, especially in thinking about, a history of the family is being more and more focused on by historians and sociologists now. They've been doing studies of monarchies and the patterns of systems of rule, but what about households and the way households actually operate? So that's all I'll have to say on that, per se. Here's the picture. Certainly nothing seeming too overtly political about it, but it is political. And this is something I just want to quickly say when it comes to art and what we look at through art history. This just looks like a cozy picture, and it is cozy, but it does send a message, right? It's an ideal family setting. First of all, it's upper middle class, clean, nicely decorated home, and a mother who is a little chunky, meaning she's well fed, she's healthy, she's got her lovely little well-dressed daughter, and what's going on? Some tending to some food, busy but cozy. Food is being cooked right now. This is an ideal that a patriarchal society wanted to see their household look like. Okay, so this is not a neutral picture. It is sending out a form of propaganda, and propaganda, again, is not always something we just say is negative or positive, but it has a political message. And I want you to kind of get used to that while you're studying history and you're analyzing the past, and you're even now in the present. It's not being conspiratorial. We need not, a person can be feminist and critique a patriarchal society and still enjoy a nice painting that's cozy. There's nothing wrong going on here, even from that point of view. It's just that it is sending a message of an ideal that the politics of the time of the home is wanting to reinforce, if that makes sense. So, okay, I'm just going to move on from there. We're going to quickly talk about, if you look in the section that we, in the book, talking about the fork, right? To this day, not everybody in the world eats with a fork. And it seems very strange to us right now in our society. Eating with your hands is something you do at barbecues and certain types of food, hot dogs, hamburgers. And then pizza gets a little ambiguous. Some people like to eat pizza with forks and knives, and other people, don't. But it was interesting to show how this was not just a class issue, but the idea of bodies touching meat. I hope you read that section because it's interesting. I would have liked them to have shown more sources as to that interpretation of why. In the book, it's saying that they didn't want to touch the meat of a dead animal, and the reasons for it were interesting, but I would like to see more sort of primary sources or something that actually directly was evidence for that interpretation of the use of the fork. And another thing that I like to do sometime, and this is what I learned from a professor I had at Modesto Junior College in Western Civ class many years ago, by a professor Bedford, who's no longer teaching there. But he pointed out that we should always put our critical goggles on as we read texts, even especially when we find them interesting. And it's fair to ask, well, what kind of evidence are they using, and is this interpretation solid? And to just kind of always be questioning that, and don't ever feel that you don't have that ability because you're not a scholar. Scholars sometimes have really strong strengths in one area and then weak in other, and sometimes they get certain things dead right and other things dead wrong. You'll hear me go over this a lot because the process of learning the past and how we conceive the future is based on our ability to kind of think through things in this way. Okay, so I'm going to end this section here. I'm going to go next into the religious wars. Now, I found a documentary that it might come off as very kind of dry and stale and a little bit pretentious in certain ways. You'll see what I mean. But I think it does a great job of explaining a very complex chapter. And I was thinking about how I wanted to go over those religious wars. And I just liked what this professor addressed and what was addressed in this documentary. There's some pictures and some points made that I think are really fundamental for helping clarify some of the importance of it. So take your notes on this, and if there's questions you have about that, you can write me and we'll go over that in more detail. And then I'm going to end the lecture on covering Russia in Ivan the Terrible, okay? And at the very least, you will find discussion of him not boring. I think that's almost impossible, no matter how you break it down. But okay, so I end here, and we'll go to cover religious wars in the next section.